Evan brushed his fingers across the sleek, black invitation card, its surface adorned with the words "The Forgotten Maze" in shimmering red letters. It had arrived mysteriously at his doorstep, bearing no return address. Along with the invitation came a single message on his phone. "Come alone. Only those who dare will survive." Despite the foreboding message, Evan couldn't resist. He'd always been a horror enthusiast, chasing thrills, testing the limits of fear. He'd heard rumors about the maze, a place so intense it felt alive. Yet no one could pinpoint who created it or why it operated out of an abandoned manor far from the city. That night, he found himself standing outside a crumbling Gothic mansion. The air was thick with a musty scent, the faint hint of decay clinging to the walls. As he entered, he spotted 5 others, all strangers, each holding the same invitation. They shared wary glances, but no one spoke. An unspoken tension hung in the air, each of them silently questioning what had brought them here. A sudden metallic click echoed through the foyer as the heavy wooden doors shut behind them. A voice crackled from unseen speakers, deep and resonant. "Welcome to the Forgotten Maze. Solve or succumb. Good luck." The group exchanged uncertain glances as they stepped forward, their footsteps echoing in the dim, candlelit hallway. They entered a room styled like a Victorian parlor. Its dim lighting cast long shadows on the walls, revealing intricate, disturbing murals of eyes watching from the darkness. The voice returned, chilling and detached. "Solve the riddle before the clock strikes, or suffer the consequence." The words settled in, and the group frantically scanned the room. Evan noticed a grandfather clock in the corner, its face frozen at midnight, ticking ominously. A woman named Lily, her hands trembling, found a scrap of paper on a dusty table. "What has many keys but cannot open a door?" "A piano," Evan whispered, his heart racing. He found an old, out-of-tune piano in the corner, pressing its middle key as the answer. The ticking stopped, a door unlocked, but just as they exhaled in relief, the room darkened, and a figure appeared, a pale, ghostly child with hollow eyes, pointing toward them. "You're not supposed to be here," it whispered before vanishing. The group moved into the next room, rattled but determined. This room, decorated like a child's bedroom from the early 1900s, was unsettling in its own way. Dolls with cracked porcelain faces sat in rows, staring blankly at the newcomers. Scratches on the walls spelled out cryptic messages, and the air was thick with dust. As they examined their surroundings, a man named Connor muttered, "This isn't just a game." He lifted his shirt sleeve to reveal a fresh scratch, deep and oozing blood, shaped like the word leave. The others stared in horror, realizing for the first time that whatever haunted this place wasn't going to let them go so easily. The next room, with its unsettling silence, resembled a nursery. Its walls were papered with faded pastel patterns, and toy blocks were strewn across the floor. A rocking chair in the corner moved slowly, as if pushed by an unseen hand. Each creak seemed to echo louder than the last, amplifying the already stifling atmosphere. Evan's eyes fell on a wall-mounted plaque. "Welcome, little ones. Playtime never ends." As he stared, a faint voice, soft and childish, whispered, "Find the hidden piece, or the shadows will come to play." The lights dimmed further, casting long shadows that began to morph and move on their own. A puzzle lay on a child-sized table in the room, with one piece missing. Lily noticed a cracked porcelain doll cradling the missing piece in its tiny, rigid hand. She reached for it cautiously, but as she did, the doll's eyes blinked and a shrill, metallic laugh filled the room. The shadows seemed to close in around them. "Quickly!" Connor yelled, pulling Lily back. Evan grabbed the piece from the doll's grasp and pressed it into place on the puzzle board. As soon as it clicked, the group found themselves in a room filled with mirrors, each one reflecting not just their faces, but moments from their past, scenes they'd never shared with anyone. The mirrors revealed their hidden fears and failures, each one captured as a reflection from their memories. For Evan, it was a dark figure looming over him during a sleep paralysis episode from years before. His reflection stood frozen, eyes wide with terror, even as he tried to look away. Lily saw her own reflection holding a wilted flower, a symbol of a past regret she'd rather have forgotten. Connor's face contorted in agony as his mirror image replayed a traumatic accident he had witnessed. A voice hissed from behind them. "The maze knows you. You can't hide." Suddenly, one mirror cracked, its glass splintering as if something was pushing from the other side. A ghastly hand reached through, grasping at Connor, pulling him forward with unnatural strength. The group panicked, trying to pull him back, their efforts frantic. But just before they lost him completely, the grip released, leaving Connor panting on the floor, his arm covered in fresh scratches that spelled guilty. They pulled him up shaken. It was clear now that the maze was more than just a game. It was dredging up their darkest memories, using them as weapons. As they entered the next room, a figure was waiting for them. A tall, shadowy man draped in tattered robes, his face hidden beneath a hood. He held a lantern that cast a faint, eerie glow across his skeletal features. "Welcome," he rasped, his voice hollow yet resonant. "I am the Maze Keeper. You are here because you carry burdens, sins, fears. The maze feeds on them." He pointed at each of them, his bony finger lingering on Evan. "Your trials are not over. Face them, or become part of this maze forever." Evan summoned his courage. "Why us? Why bring us here?" The keeper tilted his head, his hollow eyes glinting. "You all have ties to this place, whether you know it or not. Perhaps it was a distant ancestor, a forgotten encounter, or a choice that led you here. The maze remembers everything." With that, the keeper vanished, leaving only the lantern behind. The light flickered, casting twisted shadows on the walls that seemed to watch them as they prepared to continue. The group entered a dimly lit room, resembling an old graveyard, with headstones scattered across the floor. Names were engraved on each one, faint but visible in the moonlight streaming through a high window. As they read the names, they realized each stone bore a variation of their own names. Their breaths quickened, the realization settling in that this maze had foreseen their arrival. The voice from before returned, soft and menacing. "Find your way or be buried here, forgotten." Evan spotted a small spade nearby, and he used it to dig beneath his headstone. His hands trembled as he unearthed a rusted, iron key covered in mud. With the key in hand, the group rushed toward the only door in the room. But as they moved, ghostly figures began to rise from the ground, their faces twisted in pain, clawing at the air as if reaching for freedom. They managed to unlock the door and slam it shut behind them, their hearts pounding as they escaped the graveyard. But the image of those spectral faces haunted them, a cruel reminder that those who failed the maze would be doomed to wander it forever. As the door creaked open, the group entered a narrow, pitch-black hallway. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of faint whispers that echoed around them. The walls were lined with words carved in small, frantic handwriting. Some were warnings, others were pleas, all scratched into the walls by past victims who had never escaped. One message caught Evan's eye: "Trust no one, not even yourself." The whispering grew louder, forming incoherent voices that filled their minds with fear and doubt. The maze seemed to be manipulating them, trying to drive them apart. A hidden speaker crackled to life. "One of you doesn't belong. Only the worthy can survive." The group froze, looking at each other with suspicion. Paranoia set in, the message planting seeds of distrust that began to take root in their minds. They continued forward in tense silence, each wondering if they could trust their companions, or if the maze was sowing deceit among them. The next room was dimly lit, with walls covered in sepia-toned photographs of people who appeared both familiar and strange. Each person in the photos was captured in a moment of sorrow or regret, their expressions haunting and hollow. In the center of the room stood an antique table with 5 faded envelopes, each labeled with one of their names. Hesitantly, Evan opened his envelope. Inside was a photograph of him standing alone in a hospital hallway, looking devastated. He remembered the moment when he'd failed to visit his grandmother one last time before she passed. The guilt he'd buried over the years resurfaced, sharp and raw. The others reluctantly opened their envelopes, each finding their own painful memories. Tears filled Lily's eyes as she stared at a photo of her standing alone at the scene of a car accident, one she'd always blamed herself for. As they processed their guilt, the room began to shake, the walls closing in. Evan realized that the maze was using their regrets to weaken them. "We have to forgive ourselves," he whispered, feeling the weight lift as he spoke. One by one, they voiced their regrets, letting go of the guilt that the maze was feeding on. The walls stopped closing and the next door unlocked. But the maze's grip on their minds remained, tightening with every step. They entered a grand chamber, dark and foreboding, with high ceilings and walls draped in black. In the center of the room stood the maze keeper, his presence even more imposing than before. His hollow eyes glowed as he addressed them. "You've made it this far," he rasped, "but there is only one way to escape." He gestured to a stone altar with a large, ancient book bound in leather. "One of you must willingly become a part of the maze, forever trapped here, so the others may go free. Choose or stay here for eternity." The group fell silent, each one unwilling to sacrifice themselves, yet haunted by the possibility of eternal entrapment. Evan felt a surge of determination. He couldn't bear the thought of the maze claiming all of them. But before he could speak, Lily stepped forward. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady but trembling. "This maze has haunted me long enough." The keeper watched, impassive, as she placed her hand on the book. A faint glow enveloped her, and the walls of the room seemed to pulse with life, as if feeding on her spirit. Her form flickered, then faded, absorbed by the maze. A hidden door opened, revealing the way out. The remaining survivors hesitated, devastated by Lily's sacrifice. But the maze didn't give them time to grieve. They fled through the open door, the feeling of dread lessened yet still lingering. The escape route led them to a final room lined with floor-to-ceiling mirrors, each showing distorted reflections of themselves. They realized with horror that they weren't out yet. The maze had one final, twisted trial in store. The mirrors shifted to show not only their reflections, but images of Lily, trapped within the maze, her face pale and her expression tortured. Evan reached out, his hand touching cold glass, as Lily's voice echoed faintly from within. "I'll never escape, but you must before it's too late." The room began to twist and distort, the mirrors warping their reflections into monstrous versions of themselves. The maze was manipulating their own fear and guilt, using it as a final barrier. They fought their way through, smashing the mirrors one by one, each broken shard bringing them closer to freedom. Exhausted and battered, they stumbled through the last hallway, where a single door awaited them, bathed in eerie light. As they opened it, they found themselves back in the dilapidated foyer, the same place they'd entered what felt like a lifetime ago. But something was wrong. The foyer was filled with the ghostly figures of past players, eyes hollow, staring blankly as they drifted in silence. The spirits seemed to be waiting, their faces a haunting reminder of those who hadn't escaped. The survivors forced themselves through, avoiding the grasp of the lost souls, and finally stepped outside. As they looked back, the mansion began to crumble, fading into a dense fog that swallowed it whole. Weeks later, Evan tried to return to his normal life, but the maze lingered in his mind, a shadow he couldn't shake. One night, he received a text message from an unknown number. "The forgotten maze remembers." Evan's heart raced. He glanced at his arm, where faint marks from the maze still lingered, scars that would never fully heal. He knew that, even though he'd escaped, the maze hadn't truly let him go. It would remain with him, haunting him, waiting patiently, and it would call to him again.